everyone. I'm John Mullins from Themis, and welcome to today's webinar on DB2 for ZOS migration. Your presenter today will be David Simpson. Today's webinar is part 2 of a series of webinars regarding DB2 migration. Part 1 was held on September 19th, and it was delivered by Linda Clausen. If you happen to miss that particular webinar and would like to go back and review it, you can visit the URL that we saw there on the first page, the themisinc.com/webinars. There you can download the slides and view the recorded presentation from that. You can also get the slides from today's webinar at that same web page, themisinc.com/webinars. At that same web page, you can view other past webinars there. You can register for future webinars. I think we currently have 3 of them out there, but make sure you check back there often, as we're always adding new webinars, and I'm sure there'll be something of some interest to you down the road there. Today's webinar is part of a more complete migration course that we offer at Themis. You can see it listed on your screen there, the DB2 for ZOS transition. We have some public dates currently, November 12th of 2019 and January 21st of 2020. These are 3-day classes. They're offered online with live instructors, hands-on exercises, and you can take them from anywhere. So very flexible on that as well. Plus, as an added bonus for attending today, you'll see on the screen there that we're offering a discount code of a DB2 webinar. So when you register for that DB2 for ZOS transition class and you check out, just enter the discount code DB2 webinar and you'll receive a 20% discount for that. All right, today's webinar and that course that I was talking about there, they're being offered by Themis Education. Many of you have attended previous webinars or some of our previous classes along the way there, and you know that we offer a very complete and thorough DB2 curriculum and related mainframe type courses to that as well, along with other offerings including Oracle, Java, Linux, Python, Postgres, SQL, and the list goes on and on and on. So make sure you visit themisinc.com. You can click on courses and see what some of our offerings are there. The classes that we do offer, we offer through a number of different training venues. And we can come to your place and do a private class for you at your facility for your organization or multiple organizations. We also offer our classes in public classrooms throughout the country. And we also, a very popular option is that we offer our classes through online type of a venue with live instructors. So you're asking questions with hands-on exercises, and that's a very popular option that many places and people choose there. To wrap up this particular page here, remember, if you have any interest in past, present, or future webinars, visit themisinc.com/webinars. Or if you want to see any of our outlines that we offer, you can visit themisinc.com, or if you download today's slides, the slides will contain various links to outlines and course registrations that you can find out there. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, David Simpson. David is an IBM Gold consultant and a certified DB2 DBA on both ZOS and LUW, and has worked as a developer in DBA since the early 90s, and along the way has specialized on DB2 migrations and transitions through the years. Many of you are probably familiar with David. Either you've attended one of his many classes or webinars, or maybe you've seen him speak at an IDUG event where he has won awards such as Best Overall Speaker and being inducted into the IDUG Speakers Hall of Fame. Again, if you have any questions for David, you can see on this screen, there's his email address, dsimpson@themisinc.com. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to David.
Thanks, John, and thank you everybody for attending today. As John mentioned earlier, I see a bunch of people still kind of joining us. A couple of links on this page that are important. themisinc.com/webinars. If you want a copy of the slides from today's presentation, you can get that there. And as John said, lots of webinars that we've been doing since about 2015. You can see our back catalog of topics that we've covered. You can find my work at on that webinar page, and also at the IDOG website. I got a link down there as well. I work with the IDOG Content Committee to publish articles and such. So thanks for being here with us today. The agenda, as John mentioned, this is part 2 of a 3-part series that we're kind of doing to keep up with what's going on with DB2 version 12. One of the things that we're finding as we work with our clients that migrating to DB2 12 2 years ago is a little bit different than if you migrate today. And the main reason for that is this whole continuous delivery kind of agile development methodology that they're using to deliver features into DB2 12. So we're going to take a quick review of some of the things that Linda talked about in the first webinar. But if you want a whole hour of that, you can go to the webinars page and look at the one that Linda did last month. So we're going to talk about the different function levels. Linda covered briefly, she covered mostly function level M100 and M500. And especially if you were a system programmer, there was a lot of great information there with how the installation and migration actually works. She briefly covered function level 501, and then this webinar was intended to be 502 and 3, but we're going to back up and look at 501 because there are some particular things that migrating beyond M500 will, some issues that you'll encounter that I want to talk about. So that's the agenda for today, and we will get right to it here. So that first link on this page, it's in very light letters because I apparently clicked on the link in the slides. But we've given you a, well, it's a Themis link that redirects to the What's New in DB2 page. The reason it's a Themis link is because IBM has this nasty habit of moving things around on their site, and we try and keep that one updated to redirect to the right place. I'll show you what that page looks like here. This is where you want to go to keep up with what's going on with continuous delivery. So, a quick review of what Linda talked about a month ago. IBM is continuously delivering functions into version 12 as opposed to making us wait, 3 years for a new release to get new functionality. Several times a year, a new function level comes out, and you can see the history of them here. So in October of 2016, that's when DB2 12 was new. And then once in 2017, and then twice in 2018, and twice already in 2019, they've delivered new function levels. And these function levels all have a designation. You'll sometimes see them referred to as, function level 504, for example. The proper way to denote that, it would be V12R1M504. So version 12, release 1, modification level 504. Sometimes you'll just see it FL504, or in this case, function level. This website is critical going forward for you to kind of keep up with, to see what level you are at and what is available to you in that level and what goes away. Especially in the last couple of function levels, there are incompatibilities. In other words, things that won't work anymore, or at least not work the way you might be expecting them to work. This website is actually pretty concise, where it gives you the function level and what's there and what goes away. So we're going to be looking at, Linda covered the first couple, function level 100, used to be known as conversion mode, and function level 500, which was, what we used to maybe call new function mode. Most of the new features delivered in version 12 come when you activate function level 500. And then we're getting the rest of the new functionality in bits and pieces over time. So if IBM accepts one of your enhancement requests, it might be a matter of months rather than years with the agile, philosophy to get that feature into the product. So you see all these function levels that are available. They're up to 505, which was delivered over the summer. And we're here to talk about specifically, in this case, 501 through 503. Another thing we need to talk about that Linda mentioned last month, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time on here, is the APPLCOMPAT. Well, it's a ZPARM and a bind parameter and a special register that controls, for a particular application, what function level are you accepting. So for those of you who are developers or application DBAs, the system folks, the installation folks, may actually activate, version 12, release 1, M504, which is, pretty current, earlier from 2019. But for a particular application, you may decide that you're not ready for that you want that application to still behave as though it were on an earlier function level. And you can actually go back all the way through the version 12 function levels. You can also pretend you're on version 11. You can also still pretend you're on version 10. We've got a picture of that coming up here. So this APPLCOMPAT concept, or application compatibility, you can decide you don't want to accept new behavior. And when we talk about behavior here, we're really talking about application behavior. From an SQL perspective, you can think of, will the select statement give you back the same answer that it would have given you on a prior function level? We're not talking about performance, because performance characteristics can always change. We're talking about the behavior of SQL, right? Does it give you the same answer that you got on a prior function level? And you'll notice, if you look at especially M504 and M505, there are some incompatibilities there where the behavior of SQL can change if you choose to accept that function level. So the idea here is that we've divorced the application's behavior from the function level that the subsystem is at, or that your data sharing group is at. Right? Your subsystem may be at M504, but you have an application that can't tolerate that new behavior, so it's still pretending it's on version 11. And we control all of that with the APPLCOMPAT bind parameter. There's a ZPARM called APPLCOMPAT, which controls the default for the bind parameter. And for dynamic SQL, you have a special register called current application compatibility, which will override whatever the bind says. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit more going forward. These are the valid values for APPLCOMPAT currently. So V10R1, if you want your application to still behave as though it's on version 10, you can bind it with APPLCOMPAT V10R1. That's the oldest one currently supported. When you do that, you are, of course, not going to be allowed to use any SQL features from newer releases. So you don't get any version 11 new features, and you certainly don't get any version 12 new features. And the trade-off for that is you also don't get incompatibilities that would have hit you. So your SQL, from a functionality perspective, again, not performance, but functionality, will behave as though it's still on version 10. We also have V11R1. And then when you get to version 12, because of the continuous delivery, we can now pretend we're on any flavor of version 12 up through whatever you've activated. So if your system people haven't activated M504 yet, then obviously you can't use that with APPLCOMPAT. So you can work at your current activation level or lower. Notice that I've got a little note next to V12R1 M100. That is the function level that we used to call conversion mode. So if you are at V12R1 M100, you don't have any access yet to any version 12 new features. There may be subtle differences between V11R1 and V12R1 M100, particularly, I guess, in the case of incompatibilities. But I can't think of a good reason to actually use this value in an application. If you can think of one, email it to me. I'd love to, or if you have actual experience with this, I'd love to hear the story. But basically, I wouldn't normally move beyond V11R1 until I want to use something that version 12 offers, right? And so I would jump the 100 and go straight to the 500, right? So we have all the way, 500, 501, 2, 3, 4. M505 is the latest to come out. And then I put a placeholder at the bottom for any yet to be released function levels. There'll be, I would imagine 3 or 4 of these a year going forward that deliver new features to us, continuously, as the name of the feature would suggest. Okay, so there's a couple things to think about from the application perspective when using this APPLCOMPAT. I would imagine eventually version 10 R1 is going to go away. I haven't heard of a date for this yet. When they first introduced APPLCOMPAT, they promised to support 2 releases back. So if you subtract 2 from 12, you get version 10. And I'm not sure how continuous delivery impacts that. Since there may not be a version next for quite a while due to continuous availability or continuous delivery, I haven't heard anything definitive yet on when V10R1 might go away. I talked to a client a couple weeks ago who basically all of their packages are still bound at V10R1 and they're scared to change it for things that aren't changing in any other way. So in other words, perhaps if you are testing changes to a program anyway, you would bind it at the more current release or the more current function level. And since you're going through regression testing anyway, you might accept the new behavior. But in terms of going back and doing a mass rebind on all the old things, I know some of my clients are struggling with when they want to do that. Okay. Another thing to think about is, when do you change the ZPARM? So that same client I was talking about, their ZPARM is still set at V10R1. So by default, when they do a bind, they are only accepting function level, version 10. At some point, you want to update that and stay more current. I think my current thinking on this is that you want to update the ZPARM not too long after you activate a function level, so that anything new is operating at newer function levels, and anything that's being changed and actively tested can be tested at the newer function level, and then you back off of it only when you need to. All right? But that's a discussion that you should have. It is kind of a version 12 thing to think about as you migrate and as you move forward on version 12. All right? We also have the client packages, those things that start with syslh that more or less control what goes on in the distributed world. I mean, this is a big deal in 21st century applications. Right? A lot of what you run now isn't bound with static packages on the mainframe. It is dynamic SQL coming from things like Java or .NET or anything distributed. Those run through a set of client packages. And the APPLCOMPAT that you have bound those client packages at will be the default for any distributed SQL that's coming through them. This is another challenge because, if I go to rebind those things at a more current function level, I have to determine whether everything distributed that's using them is ready for the new behavior. So do I coordinate with all of my distributed apps and figure out whether they can handle the new function level? Or do I bind these packages multiple times in different collections, and then there is a client configuration item called current package set that you can set to determine which set of distributed packages are being used? This is actually kind of a big topic and not one that we have time to go through in depth here. But it is something you should be thinking about as you migrate and work through the different function levels. All right, for the installation people in the room, when you go to activate a new function level, you've got to think about all of these things. Number one, is there a catmate necessary? That website that I showed you will tell you the catalog level required for each of the function levels. The short way of saying this is sometimes a new function level will require catalog maintenance, and sometimes it won't. It depends on what they're delivering and whether catalog changes are needed. So you want to be kept on top of that. The DECP, which has the SQL level, in other words, what's the precompiler going to allow you to do for your COBOL type applications. The ZPARMs often need to be assembled again when you go to a new function level, and then you've got to activate it. For you system folks, I know it's not popular to use the panels for this kind of stuff, but the installation panels actually can be really useful here when you're activating a new function level. It will generate a set of jobs for you that do all of the required steps. So in other words, it knows whether you need a catmate. It'll generate the reassemble of the DECP and ZPARMs and a job to activate. Using the panels is particularly helpful if you're skipping function levels. So let's say I'm at M500 today, and I want to go all the way to M504. Right? I don't want to activate these things one at a time, which is a good question that I still am having conversations with folks at IBM about, what their recommendations for this are. But if you migrate to version 12 today, there are 5 levels, or 6 actually if you count M500, right? 6 different potential function levels you could be at. My guess is you're not going to want to migrate through all 6 one at a time. So if you're going to skip some, the panels will actually generate everything that's needed. Okay. Otherwise, you might have to, piece that stuff together yourself. So just a quick side note for the system folks in the room. I know most of you guys don't like using the panels, but it might actually be helpful in this case to generate exactly what is needed. All right. When you go to activate, or before you even do that, you can run this command, activate function level, and tell it what you want, and put the keyword test on the end, and it'll tell you whether you're ready for that. Right? And there's several things that you need to be ready. You need the appropriate maintenance applied, and the website I showed you earlier gives you the APAR that is the coordinating APAR for maintenance. Your catalog has to be at the right level, right? And then you'll be ready to activate. So this particular subsystem is currently at M100, or conversion mode. And I asked it, well, I want to go straight to 501. Right? I want to skip 500 and go to 501. And it basically says, yes, I'm eligible in the red box here. This subsystem is eligible for 501, so I can go straight there without stopping at 500. If you're data sharing, then the part at the bottom will tell you your current code level for each member and the capable highest and lowest function level. Okay, so that'll be based on your maintenance and your catalog level. Right? If there's a catmate required, your highest function level will be limited by the catmates that you've actually run. Right? So running this test can be helpful. If you do a display group, it'll give you a lot of this information as well, just in a display format. So this is a test, right? If I take the word test off, it's actually going to try and activate that level in this subsystem. We also have catalog support for this. Syslevel updates gets a row in every time you perform maintenance that will allow you to go to a new function level, anytime you do a catmate, and anytime you actually activate a new function level. So it'll give you timestamps, RBAs or LRSNs, depending on whether or not you're data sharing. So you can kind of keep track of when things happen from a maintenance and function level perspective in this catalog table, which is kind of nice. Never really had anything like that before. If you're on the application side and you want to know these things, like what current function level am I at, you get the catalog level, the default SQL level, that comes from your DECP, and the product ID extension, that's the actual activated level, right? So you have access to these things through IBM supplied global variables that you can query. So if your application needs to know what level you're at, you've got IBM supplied global variables for that. When you look at syspackage, we got a couple of things to look at there. You have the function level column, and you have APPLCOMPAT. So you can look, if you look at this one, APPLCOMPAT will tell you which level of application compatibility am I using for this application. Okay, so for this program, I'm saying, hey, I'm going to pretend like I'm on version 12 M500. The function level there tells you, what was actually activated at the time this package was bound. Okay, so the APPLCOMPAT is the one that's really important from that perspective. You can see in syspack copy, this goes to the plan management feature, right? Each package can have up to 3 copies now. So there's some previous copies that are not currently running. You can tell I ran the oldest one here. I was in conversion mode at the time, M100, but when I ran that bind, I was still saying, let's pretend we're on version 11, V11R1. Okay. So for any particular application, you can see what its current application compatibility is. So let's take a quick look then at M501. This is a screenshot straight from the website that I showed you earlier. It gives you the enabling APAR. So for your system folks, you've got to have that APAR applied. That APAR will really just prereq, everything needed for a particular function level, right? So you're probably not just applying that one PTF. You're applying, maintenance that includes that PTF and then prereqs everything that's needed. Okay. The minimum catalog level, that's kind of interesting. V12R1 M500. What that tells me is that there is no cat maint needed for M501. In other words, the catalog that you have in M500 still works. Right? So I can go straight to 501 from 500 with no cat maint. Right? And then a brief description of what's in this function level. And if you go to the full website, it gives you an awful lot more detail. M501 was a kind of special function level. It came very early on, and I think they wanted to just give us something, right, with some feature that we could activate beyond the base. All right, so M501 really only has one thing in it. It's a built-in function called listag. I actually saw some discussion on the DB2 listserv a few weeks ago where somebody was asking for this exact functionality. And I actually replied and said, well, if you're on version 12 and you've activated at least V12R1 M501, then you have this functionality in the form of the listag function. All right, so no cat maint required, only one new feature, listag built-in function. No documented incompatibilities. Well, I'll give you one. Before you move beyond M500, so for those of you still planning your migrations, or if you are at 500 now and thinking about activating forward, the APAR that I've got on the screen there is one that you really want to look at. Without this APAR, and it's you follow me here, there's a long string of things that have to be true, but it can be really bad if you don't think about this ahead of time. If you activate 501 or higher, and you take the client packages, those syslh guys that handle all of the distributed SQL, and you rebind them with APPLCOMPAT greater than M500, bad things might happen to you. At that point, distributed connections require that a driver property be set called APPLCOMPAT. It's called client APPLCOMPAT. It's a driver property. It's not optional. You have to set it. It's a new one, so you have to be at super new versions of the client or JDBC drivers or whatever you're using to connect. And the application has to set this thing. There is no default, and if you don't set it, the connection will fail. Okay. It's also, if you're using a DB2 Connect gateway, which is, how do I hear IBMers talk about this now? I think the words are not strategic, which means they're going to try and make it go away at some point. So you have, features that don't exist anymore are eliminated, right? Features that are still there but they don't want you to use are deprecated. One step above that is not strategic. And so the use of a DB2 Connect gateway is not strategic. It's still supported, but they don't really want you to use it, and you might not see new features get supported there. It is currently not possible to set that client application compatibility if you're using a Connect gateway server. Okay. And so like for DB2 Connect, or if you're using a Connect gateway, there was really no way to function at function level 501 or higher. Now, hear what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. For this problem to hit you, you have to have activated beyond 500, and you have to have rebound your client packages at higher than 500 with APPLCOMPAT. Okay. Now, what this APAR does is it takes the APPLCOMPAT from the packages and makes it the default for that driver property that nobody is setting. Okay, so it will now have a default, which means that the connections don't fail outright, and you can still use a gateway. What you can't do is easily change application compatibility from the default to something else if you're using that gateway. All right, but it doesn't just make everything fail outright. All right, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if you are at 500 or if you haven't migrated yet, before you migrate beyond 500, review that APAR, right? Read everything in there. Make sure you're ready, right? And particularly if you're going to bind your client packages at a level that's higher than 500. Read the APAR. It's really important, and I think you're going to want to make sure that is applied. That APAR was released in April of this past year, so it's pretty new. If you're keeping up with maintenance, you probably have it. But yeah, you pretty much want that one before you go beyond 500. All right, so the one thing that they delivered to us in 501 was this list ag function. All right, and I've given you an example of it here. This is coming out of the good old IBM sample tables. I'm querying from a table called empproj_act, right, which has one row for every thing that an employee is doing, right, for every project and activity that an employee is working on. So this is an aggregate function, meaning if I'm going to get more than one row, I need a group by, right? So here I'm saying group by employee number. So you can tell right there, employee number 10 has actually at least 3 rows in this table for various projects that she is working on. But the list ag function basically turns, pivots that row data into a comma delimited, in this case, list. So I want a list of all the projects that employee number 10 is working on. The list ag function will do that. So what you see on that first row of the result is actually at least 3 rows in the table, but I've grouped by employee number, so I get 1 row for every unique occurrence of employee number, and then the project numbers that that person works on in a comma delimited list. You see I'm using the keyword distinct there on the list ag. That just says if employee number 10 has more than one activity for project 80, 30, 100, I don't want to see it twice, just once in the list. Okay, you don't have to use the word distinct. but distinct just dedupes, deduplicates your comma delimited list. It doesn't have to be comma delimited. You see the second argument in list ag is what do you want the delimiter to be? And then I give it an order by, within group order by project number. So I get it's an ordered list, comma separated. Neat little function. If you want this functionality without this function, it's pretty complicated to do with SQL. Fairly straightforward with the list ag function. Okay, and that was it. That is all that's in M501 is that one function. All right. Moving on to 502, function level 502 here. And again, I just screenshotted from the website. It gives you the enabling APAR again. And then the minimum catalog level is V12R1 M502. So I know here that my catalog needs maintenance to apply this one. Right, so 501 I could just activate. I didn't need any cat maint. Right, there were no catalog changes. 502 does have catalog changes, and so there is an associated cat maint that goes with it. I can tell that just by looking at the website. Right, there is a catalog update for this one, and it tells you exactly what's added there. There's a key label column added to the following catalog tables, 4 of them, and that is to support the encryption enhancement that you get in 502. Okay. So 502, cat maint required. Here are the features. Explicit casting between numeric and graphic data types. So the graphic data types are, they're like character when you're using a double byte character set like UTF-16. You typically will do that if you are representing character data that includes, all the world's languages, right? Where we run out of bits with UTF-8 with only 8 bits. So double byte character set, right? 2 bytes for every represented character. Apparently you could not cast numerics directly to graphic data types before. And if you want to do that, you have to activate function level 502. There are other changes to the migration jobs and panels. The thing that is not on this list that probably should be is some encryption changes. Okay, and that was what the cat maint was for. Function level 503. Oh, again, no new documented incompatibilities with function level 502. So in other words, if you are already running APPLCOMPAT V12R1 M501, there's nothing IBM knows about or wants to tell us about anyway that says that won't also work on M502. Okay, so there are no documented incompatibilities with the prior function level. Okay, M503. Okay, again, another cat maint, right? So the catalog level has to be at M503. So before I can activate this one, I'm going to have another cat maint. And this does have, some ramifications if you're skipping levels. So if you're currently at M500 and you want to go straight to M503, there would normally be 2 cat maints. And again, the migration panels will sort all that out for you, right? And the cat maint utility will, I believe, consolidate it for you as well. So again, using the panels helps here because it figures it all out for you. Okay. All right, again, another cat maint. The big thing we get here is support for replication tools and system temporal tables. All right, so there is a new global variable. It was listed on the previous page that will help your replication tools be able to deal with system temporal. So system temporal tables are those things that are keeping track of what rows used to look like using a history table. And replication tools have always had a difficult time figuring out what to do with that. So we've got some support for that. We've also got some changes to the way system temporal interacts with the data change operation column. The data change operation column was actually new in version 12. So you couldn't even use that prior to V12R1 M500. It basically will tell you what's the last thing that happened to this row. Was it just inserted? Has it been updated? Or was it deleted? 3 values for that column, I, U, and D. It's automatically managed by DB2. Okay. The change here is what happens if you add that data change operation column to a system temporal table after you already have rows on the table. Okay, what's going on with those old rows, and are they visible in your temporal queries, your time travel type queries? All right, read the documentation on that, but that is a change in behavior. We also start getting a console message whenever a new catalog level or function level is activated. This one does introduce some incompatibilities. So if you're using that data change operation, or if you're adding a data change operation column to an existing table, then you want to understand the new behavior as opposed to the old. And if you want the old behavior, you can always set your current application compatibility back to the old way. All right. This is going to actually be a really big deal for function level 504, just to preview the next webinar a little bit. For now, let me just say, you probably don't want to go to function level 504 as a DBA without some serious thought put into it, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. There is a stored procedure, an IBM supplied stored procedure that loses support in M503. I don't think this is one that a lot of people are using. But if you activate 503 and use APPLCOMPAT of 503, you can't call that stored procedure anymore. Just a quick note here that ifkid 376, if you capture that ifkid, it will tell you whenever you use a feature that's not likely to be supported on a future function level. Okay, so collecting that thing is probably not a bad idea, especially if you're about to activate a new function level. Okay. So as of this webinar, there are 2 additional function levels that we have not talked about, 504 and 505. So we're going to do a webinar in the next few months on those. And so I'd urge you to keep a lookout for that in the coming months. 504 is a particularly interesting one, and again, just a quick preview of what you might expect from that. Activating beyond 503 will cause significant changes and significant incompatibilities, especially for DBAs. Just quick preview, the big thing that happens here is they're finally trying to get us to stop creating legacy objects, things like segmented table spaces or classic partitioned table spaces. They want everything to be a universal table space going forward. And if you are operating under APPLCOMPAT V12R1 M504 or greater, it basically will not allow you to create those old objects. It does it in a little bit of a weird way. So if you run the DDL to create a segmented table space, it just upgrades it for you to a PBG. Not real sure how I feel about that. It caused me a little bit of angst the first time I tried to do it, and it just does something, you ask for a segmented table space and it gives you something else without really telling you. Yeah, so you just got to be ready for that. Now, if I want to create a segmented table space and I'm on M504, I can do it. I just have to set current application compatibility back to 503 or before. Okay. We'll talk about that in the next webinar in some more detail. All right, but it is something I want you to be aware of before you, accidentally run into things that you weren't expecting. Okay. So as John mentioned, this is all part of a transition class that we're doing a couple times in the next few months, and I'd urge you to check that out. And John mentioned the discount. My email address will be on the last slide, and you can feel free to contact me if you have any questions going forward.
Thank you, David. David and I and Themis would like to thank you for attending today's webinar. As David mentioned, be sure to visit our themisinc.com webpage for more information on courses and other offerings we have, or go to themisinc.com/webinars, where you can get a copy of the slides from today's webinar, or to view past webinars, or to register for future webinars. And remember the discount code that David just mentioned. So if you have some interest in registering for the DB2 12 for ZOS transition public course offering that we have either on November 12th or January 21st of 2020, remember we have a discount code of DB2 webinar, and that'll give you a 20% discount on that. Plus, if those dates don't work for you, just contact us. We'll see what we can work out for you and any of your co-workers that might have some interest. Keep checking our webinar page. As David had mentioned, there will be a part 3 webinar on this particular topic, so that'll be coming up in the next few months. And then also just to check on other webinars that we might be offering then. So thank you again for attending. And if you have any questions, contact David at dsimpson@themisinc.com.